BENTO is the new flagship sampling, sequencing, looping, mixing, and granular hardware from 1010Music. It brings together elements from some of their other instruments into a single package and adds more hands-on controls, a bigger touchscreen, velocity and pressure-sensitive pads, and more simultaneous tracks. In this video, I'll examine its capabilities and look at some pros and cons compared to the competition. Before I start, a quick disclosure: 1010Music sent me BENTO. Other than that, no money changed hands. They have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. Also, while the hardware is final, the firmware is still in beta, so some things you see here may change in the final firmware. Okay, let's get started. BENTO takes inspiration and plenty of features from 1010Music's Black Box, their sampler/looper/sequencer, Lemon Drop, their granular synth module, and potentially some of Blue Box, their mixer, depending on how the firmware evolves. What's immediately apparent is the new form factor and plenty of hands-on controls, 8 endless encoders instead of just 4 or 2 on the others, 16 pads, which are velocity and pressure sensitive, and plenty of other buttons, and a large touchscreen with multi-touch, which is about 6.5 inches or 16 centimeters wide. Despite all these additional controls, BENTO feels quite compact. It's slightly over a Volca wide and slightly under 2 Volcas deep. So it feels very portable. It has a built-in rechargeable battery rated for 3 hours, so it's literally grab and go, assuming you have headphones. There's no built-in speaker and no built-in microphone either. In terms of project scope, you can load up one project into memory at a time. Each project can have up to 8 tracks in total, and each of these tracks can be one of 5 track types currently. I say currently because I've been told the plan is to add MIDI tracks to sequence external gear and audio tracks to process audio coming in from external gear. Anyway, in this current beta, the track types are a multi-sampled melodic instrument, this can be based either on one sample that's pitched up across the entire chromatic range, which wouldn't sound good, or in the case of this multi-sampled piano, 123 individual samples. Anyway, that's one track type. The second track type is called a one-shot track. As expected, this can hold 16 one-shot samples. You can use this for kits, but it will hold and play back any sample you like. The next track type is a loop track. This track type lets you live record or playback loops, up to 16 loops per track, and it has an algorithm that adapts loop playback length to the tempo of your project without changing the loop's pitch. This works nicely within reasonable bounds and depending on the source content type. And you can stop loops and launch others. You can't go super slow with this. But as long as it's not too far from the original recorded tempo, it'll be okay. And the next track type is a slicer. This lets you chop up longer samples into smaller slices, and you can then sequence those slices. And then the last track type is a granular instrument. This lets you use granular synthesis to process samples, basically really tiny chops that you can create textures with, and you can also create beat-synced grains with this. Note that you can only add one granular instrument to a project. So once you've added one, you can always add additional instruments, but the granular ones will be grayed out. So let's say load up this one. I now have 2 multi-sampled instruments in this project. Samples stream from the SD card as necessary, so there's no limit in terms of available RAM. Each sample, though, is limited to up to 4 gigabytes, and you're also limited to 576 individual samples per project. On the bottom of each track, you'll see how many samples it's using, and on the bottom of the screen, you'll see the available samples in the sample pool. Available samples, by the way, isn't polyphony, so if I load up, let's say one more multi-sampled instrument, let's go for this. You can see I've taken up an additional 31 samples. The more you play, the more polyphony and CPU you'll use. 1010Music has told me that in the final firmware, polyphony will be up to 24 voices. Each track in a project, except loop tracks currently, can be sequenced with up to 256 steps per sequence. And then each track also gets 4 sequences. And you can launch, pick, and choose any of these 4 sequences as you like. Kind of like a mini Ableton Live style session grid. Now in this firmware, the scene and song buttons don't do much, but I'm told the plan is to let you choose which sequences you want to launch on a per scene basis, and then you can use the song page to arrange those scenes in a song or to just launch scenes. From a connectivity perspective, BENTO is no slouch for its size. It's got 4 stereo outputs, 3 stereo inputs, TRS, MIDI in and out, 2 of each. All of these are 3.5mm jacks. While connectivity is excellent, I found the port labels on the back very hard to read unless light hits them in a very particular angle, so I added these stickers on the back. And then it has both a USB-C host jack and a USB device port. So you can both connect a MIDI device to it and charge it simultaneously or connect it to a computer simultaneously. It also comes with a little splitter for USB and power. There's an SD card slot on the right, and BENTO needs an SD card to run. It comes with one. There's no internal memory. And BENTO also has VESA mount screws on the bottom, which is a nice addition. In terms of build, BENTO feels very solid. There's no encoder wobble. The pads are very light to the touch, which I personally like, so you don't need to apply a lot of force to get sound going. I did notice some latency when triggering the pads. 1010Music have improved this with beta firmwares that I received, so it's gotten much better. I'll remeasure this when I get the production firmware and add the stats to the description. The color touchscreen is LCD, not OLED, but has fairly good viewing angles, and the colors are bright and crisp. Let's take a quick tour of the panel and workflow. The 8 endless encoders on top change whatever parameter is written under them on the screen. So for example, this changes phones level. Sometimes they'll control parameters in the middle, for example, when controlling levels or delay and reverb sends. In other screens, for example, the instrument screens, you can choose different blocks on screen and the encoders will control the parameters in the highlighted block. Under the encoders is a touchscreen with multi-touch, so it accepts pinches and zooms and 2-finger scrolling. And then you'll often see these tabs or buttons at the bottom of the screen and a little hamburger menu icon here in the bottom with 1 or more functions that are relevant to what's going on the screen. Then under the screen are the navigation buttons. The arrow keys have different functions based on which screen you're on. So for example, on this screen, the right arrow dives in quickly to track parameters, something that you'd otherwise need to access using this menu. And the other buttons go to different screens. And of course, these control transport. Pressing record will either record MIDI or audio depending on the track you're on. Let's briefly go through these different screens. The tracks screen lets you choose the active track, gives you quick control of output levels using the encoders, and gives you access to configure track parameters, like I mentioned, either by pressing this or pressing the right arrow. This is where you can also rename the track or swap out the patch, choose which MIDI channel controls it, and which of the outputs it goes to. You've got the sample count and CPU meter here as well, and project scale. You edit the project scale in the project menu in its project settings. You can play chromatically, by the way, if you want, not in scale. It's implemented sequentially. I think it would be better if they implemented a piano style layout where these would be the white keys and then the black keys would be up top here. If you have any free empty tracks on the screen, just double tap and you can load any one of the presets, and you can see this little icon next to each preset showing you the preset type, and you can search by sound categories as well. You can't type in a search, which would be nice, and I don't think you can define custom categories, but certainly this is a nice way to organize things. Anyway, when you want to edit the instrument on a track, either double tap it or press instrument. The dashboard here varies based on the type of track. I'll dive into these a bit later. One thing in common to instruments is the modulation matrix, which is available using this hamburger menu. When you press it, you'll see all the different modulation destinations in a track, and you can choose up to 3 sources for each destination. The sources you can choose from will also vary based on the track type. So the granular track type has the most destinations and sources, but for other instrument types, you might find more limited destinations and sources. Continuing with the tour, I'll dive into launch and sequencing in a bit. We talked about song and scene, which aren't completed in this firmware. The mixer lets you control levels, mute, and delay and reverb sends, as well as overall output levels. The effects button lets you edit the global effects. We'll take a listen to these later, but generally speaking, there's one global insert effect, which can be one of 3 effect types. And you can choose on a per track basis which track you want to run through this. And then reverb and delay are sends either on a per track basis or on a per pad basis for kits and loops. Okay, let's dive into the different instrument types. Let's start with the kits. If you open a brand new kit, so let's hit new and go to one shot, you'll see the 16 empty slots, and you simply load up a sample into an empty slot. You can just navigate the SD card and go to one shot or any other sample. There's no preview for samples, unfortunately, at least not currently. As of the current firmware, you can't sample from this page, but I'm told that's coming. If you want to load up entire kits, you can do that as well. Just hit change patch, and you can change it to any instrument, not just kits, but certainly easily load up a kit, which is now populated in here. Anyway, let's go back into the kit. Again, either double tap or press instrument. This is the kit overview. This overview lets you choose levels per pad in the kit, 8 pads at a time. Then to edit the pads, just press edit. I won't go over all these parameters, but you can repitch the sample, pan it. You'll see these change, by the way, on a per pad basis, and you can reverse the pad. You've got a few launch modes, polyphony and choke groups, then an envelope and an LFO, which by default isn't routed to anything, but like I mentioned, you press modulation and you can route the LFO to any one of these destinations. Back to the dashboard, you can also see the wave file of each sample and trim it if you like. Let's move on to the next instrument type, which is the multi-sampled instrument. You use this to play samples melodically. You can't create multi-samples on board, and you can't auto-sample multi-samples in here like you can, say, on Black Box, at least not in the current firmware. So hopefully they'll add that, but you can either load up multi-samples or even play a single sample melodically, also create a new multi-sample, and then you can choose to load either a single sample or, for example, you could go into the multi-samples I've got on my Patreon, shameless plug, dive into, say, one of these and press load all. And I've just loaded 21 samples into this instrument. If we dive in to edit it, again, either press this or double tap here, you can see we've got similar controls here. You can't edit the wave files on multi-samples. You just get a representation of one of the samples. So they're pretty much set in place, at least as of the current firmware. But you've got these sound design controls. So for example, I can add an attack envelope, a longer release. Notice it's not polyphonic now, so I can change it into any one of these polyphonic modes. Let's say 6 is enough. And of course, modulation is available. So for example, I could change the waveform of the LFO, then maybe point it to the level destination, apply a mod depth, and I'll definitely want to increase its rate. For a nice tremolo. Moving on, let's take a look at the granular instrument. Let's dive in and press instrument or double tap. If you're familiar with 1010Music's Lemon Drop, you'll feel right at home here. It has exactly the same parameters as far as I could tell, just way less menu diving. I won't go over all of these, but the basic structure is 2 samples, which you can granulate, meaning play little grains from across the sample, and then another oscillator, which you can play in tandem with the granular engines. This oscillator is just a standard virtual analog style oscillator. You've got dual filters, which you can route in series, parallel, or per oscillator. Dual envelopes, dual LFOs, and a modulation sequencer. If you see these little dots, by the way, it means you can double tap and edit that object. So plenty of functionality here. Besides double tapping into the grains, you can also go in here to edit them. There's an abundance of granular parameters to play with here, 2 pages of them actually. Moving on, let's take a look at the looping instrument. I already covered this briefly. You've got up to 16 loops per track. Loops not only time stretch like I showed you earlier, but they'll also pitch shift. So if I go ahead to edit this, as you shift pitch up or down, BENTO will use granular techniques to keep the loop in line with the tempo. Works very nicely, I think. I'll save the effect parameters for when we talk about the effects. Then there are a bunch of launch and playback quantization options. If you turn quant size to none, by the way, then you can launch a loop without transport running. So that's an interesting way to time stretch or pitch shift one-shots. You can play multiple loops at a time if they're not in a choke group. So you can build an entire performance just by swapping loops in and out. Let's take a brief look at BENTO as a live looper. I'll take audio coming out of the S1 here, and I've plugged it into the audio input. Let's create a brand new looping instrument and go into the recording tab. So this is the S1. I could just hit record and play into this, but let's maybe set a recording threshold, lower this down. I can record a custom length, or let's just go for a bar and just hit record and play something. Let's go for, and I should have turned on rec to play. If I didn't, by the way, I could just play it back through here. Let's maybe turn on rec to play and try that again. Go into this one, rec, and then record this. So we've got rec to play, and we can add this loop to it, which doesn't sound too great. But yeah, that's basically how you live loop. This doesn't work exactly like a live looper because there are no overdubs, but you can always add additional layers by recording into empty slots. Let's maybe go into these, hit edit, take a look at the sample. There are no trimming options here, which would be nice because as you can see, my timing needs improvement, but that's basically live looping. Let's quickly dive into the slicer instrument. So here the idea is you load up a sample first, presumably one you want to chop up. Let's not choose slice backwards. Let's choose none. So each pad triggers its own unique slice. And you can either scan for transients. You can, of course, zoom in and out and see where you're at within the context of the larger sample. You can select slices like this to see their position. I won't go through everything here, but basically it's easy to add slice points or just auto slice into a grid up to 128 slices, by the way. So you're not limited to just 16 slices, but let's go for 16 and zoom out. So those are our slices. And you can, of course, play these live, but a lot of the fun is to sequence them, which is a good segue into sequencing. So if we press the launch button, we can choose which sequence out of 4 we want to use within this project. Press the sequence button, either play these live when transport is running. So that's one way to explore splices. I'm not saying it's the recommended way. There's no undo, unfortunately. And by the way, this is limited to the polyphony of the instrument. So in this case, it's set to mono, but if I want more craziness, I could set up to 2-note polyphony in the case of this instrument. So this is my lovely pattern. Needs work. Let's maybe choose a calmer track to learn sequencing. So back into here, I'll choose an empty sequence and let's go edit this. So I can easily add events into the sequence manually. Pretty nice. You'll see different parameters whether you press this tab or this tab. In the event tab, you can choose a single event and edit its parameters. So say if I wanted to transpose this node up or down, or make it longer, change its velocity or the probability of playback. You can also select multiple notes and edit them together. Then the Sequence tab has a few additional parameters. For example, the relative clock playback speed for this sequence, the step count, which can be any step. Maybe that was too extreme. And I don't know if it's a beta thing or user error, but it's still playing the entire pattern. So let's change the quantization. Let's go for this. Yep. So that's pretty nice. We can push our luck with the beta and double the pattern. So that kept the previous notes in there. Anyway, I think you're getting the idea. Clear will clear. Clear all will clear the entire sequence. And then to record live into the sequence, just hit record and record something. Recording is tied to the grid currently. There's no micro timing, but I've been told micro timing is on the roadmap. Anyway, I think it's pretty cool that you can record an idea and then go into a different clip and maybe put a different idea into that. And then launch a different clip. Go back to this clip and of course do that for any of the clips in the project. I think that's pretty much it for sequencing, except that when you edit kits, when you sequence kits, since you only have 16 pads or notes, you'll see the sample names here, which is nice. Beside that, they're identical to the other sequences and also go up to 256 steps. It's a bit of a chore to decrease the step count, but it's doable. Hopefully they add like a half function or something. And then at least currently you can't sequence loop tracks. Hopefully they add something here too. Okay, let's move on and talk about effects. So some effects live on a per pad basis or per track basis, and some are master effects or global sends. Let's go into an instrument to listen to these. So there's an overdrive, which I think sounds very nice, by the way. And then there's a filter, both a low pass filter with resonance and a high pass if you go to positive territory. So these exist per track or even per pad in the one-shot or kit instruments. So for example, I could choose to apply drive to this, but not to this, or just filter this, and not this. Another advantage of these per pad or per track effects is that you can typically modulate them. So in this case, drive and filter cutoff and resonance are modulation destinations. Then let's move on to the master or global effects. Delay and reverb are sends. We'll take a listen to them in a second. And the mod effect is an insert effect which you choose on a per track basis. So for example, if I want to apply this to my piano, I need to dive into the configuration or just press the right arrow and then route this audio to the mod effects. So this is with the effect and this is without. So let's take a brief look at the effect parameters. It's got sends to the delay and reverb. So let's turn those off so we can just hear the raw effect. Anyway, flanger and distortion. So that's that, and then there's a chorus. Let's take down the delay again. And a phaser. Again, the delay is on by default for some reason, so that's the raw phaser. Okay, and let's listen to the delay and reverb. So these are sends. It means that if I want to apply them to tracks that don't have multiple pads, then I need to do that within the mixer. So let's say start with a delay. You'll see this little arrow appear here, which doesn't appear when you're looking at the levels or mutes, and I need to send my piano to the delay to hear it. When I'm on tracks that have multiple pads, then I can do this on a per pad basis. The sends are here. So let's say send this to the delay and this one to the reverb. Reverb, delay. Anyway, once you've sent audio to them, you can, of course, change their character. For the delay, we've got feedback and cutoff to filter it. Width, ping pong, on and off, tempo sync, beat sync. Nice delay, I think. Then let's still use our piano, turn down the delay send, and go to the reverb send. And let's take a look at its parameters. There are a few reverb styles. I don't know if it's a beta thing or just the way it's going to be. There's a bit of crackling when you change reverb types, but that settles down once you finish the change. I like that it has a freeze, which is always nice to have. And I think I missed a couple of reverb types at the beginning of the list. I think the reverb and delay here are excellent. Then besides these effects, there's a master compressor, which you access through the mixer by double pressing it. You can turn it on or off, and there are the typical compressor parameters on it. Okay, so this is the part of the video where I usually discuss pros and cons. The problem is I don't have a production-ready firmware. Several features haven't been implemented in this beta, like the song and scene functions. MIDI and audio tracks don't exist yet, though their functionality is expected to be straightforward, and some sampling and sample editing functions are missing. Despite that, I'm going to do something which you shouldn't if you plan to buy BENTO and these extra features are important to you, and assume that 1010Music is going to implement those features at some point to the extent that those features exist in Blackbox. That said, I'll say it again, never make a purchase decision based on what isn't already there. Feel free to ask me in the comments section if they implemented a feature you didn't see in this video. Anyway, so all that said, pros for BENTO are what I've liked about pretty much every 1010Music product I've used. Once you understand the basics of what's going on, and hopefully you do after seeing this video, these are very easy to use and to get back to. There's plenty of screen real estate, so things are written pretty clearly. Maybe the only thing that's a bit hidden is this little hamburger menu. With their products, I've found it very rare that I needed to reference the manual, and BENTO has plenty of fun features: the clip launching, the live looping, the live recording or step sequencing. The different track types are fun to explore. It's very easy to get into the flow of music making here. Also, compared to the competition, whether it's a competing Groovebox or a DAW with an interface and controller, BENTO is compact and portable. Velocity and pressure sensitive pads aren't something you see frequently in this form factor, and it's got generous connectivity for its size. So assuming MIDI sequencing and effects on audio inputs are implemented, it can also be a nice brain for a setup that doesn't take up much space, and it also has a built-in battery, so it's easy to take it on the go. So those are the pros. On the cons side, as always, the trade-off is between simplicity and number of features and complexity. Now, while BENTO's instruments have sometimes a lot of functionality, and in other cases certainly adequate, its sequencer is fairly basic. Besides velocity and probability, you can't automate parameters here, and there are no generative or Euclidean features that you might find on other competitors. Then an unknown as of the making of this video, which may change, is bugs, polyphony, and latency, all of which have improved as I was getting new BENTO firmwares, so hopefully these will be a non-issue in production. The company says they'll get to 24 voices, which if that's the case, I think is very reasonable, so time will tell. Further, on the hardware side, there's no microphone or speaker if those are important to your workflow. And then beside that, on the hardware side, I found that the labels on the back are really hard to read unless the light is shining in a particular way, so you might need to stick on labels or write on it on the back like I did. And then another important feature that I think is missing here is undo. Especially when sequencing, I think that it would be nice to take back mistakes. Then on the sound palette side, while its instruments are diverse, BENTO doesn't support drum synthesis or instrument plugins, something some of its competitors do. And price-wise, it's more expensive than some competitors like the MPC-1. So to sum it up, BENTO's workflow is very fast, simple, and fun, and it's a very proficient sample mangler. Whether you want to play, chop, slice, loop, or granularize samples, there's a lot to explore here. Beside that, if you're looking for sampled instruments for this or any other sampler, you'll find them on my Patreon along with my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.